The men are joining the women by only having 8 counting elements. Vault families are changing again, and scales are coming back into fashion whether athletes or coaches want them to or not. For those new here, I'm Kensley, the host of Neutral Deductions, a podcast all about men's gymnastics. This is episode 47, and I am joined by Category 2 Brevet Judge Kathi-Sue Rupp, who is going to break down many of the changes to expect for the 2025 through 2028 Code of Points.
This is the Neutral Deductions podcast, men's gymnastic news, coverage, and analysis. Hosted by Kensley Beal.
Kathi-Sue, welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. You've done a great job with the podcast and bringing men's gymnastics to the forefront and helping to educate people and help them to learn more to become great fans of men's gymnastics, and love to help out to have that happen more.
Thank you. I am so excited for Kathi-Sue to be here. We have known each other about 5 years now, and actually a sort of interesting interaction where I was putting out my survey on clarinetist health problems during my PhD, and Kathi-Sue Rupp reached out to me and said, "Are you also a musician?" And she has degrees in music just like I do, but is also heavily involved in the gymnastics world. And we've been great colleagues ever since. So as I mentioned in the top of the show, big changes coming to the men's Code of Points. In my opinion, some of the biggest changes since the Code of Points went from the 10-0 system to the open-ended Code of Points. So we're seeing a big shift here. So for those who didn't know, or maybe who haven't had the chance to really explore Code of Points in the past, the men used to count 10 elements and the women counted 8. Now, junior men have counted 8 elements, but not the senior men. And now that is changing. So the senior men are now matching the junior men and they're matching the women, and they're going to have 8 elements counting in their routine. So I'm curious from your perspective, how do you think this is going to change routine construction? Do you think that we're going to see more different routines, or do you think everything is going to start to look a little bit more cookie cutter?
Yeah, it's going to affect each apparatus a little bit differently. And for some of the apparatus, it's going to make it look different. And for others, it's going to kind of make them look more similar. The other thing that's really going to play a big part, even more so than the 8 elements, is the fact that the element groups are being evaluated differently. And that's going to have a huge impact, and probably more of an impact than just going down to 8 elements will.
So let's break that down for some people who may not be like in the nitty gritty of men's gymnastics. So what is at the very basic level an element group, and how does that affect how you judge a routine?
Okay, so each apparatus has 4 element groups, and the gymnast is trying to have at least 1 element from each element group, because that adds 5/10 or up to 5/10 to their score. So that's huge. If you're missing an element group, then your difficulty value is starting down by possibly 5/10 from every other gymnast, and that happens across 4 different element groups. So for every apparatus, there's let's take high bar for example, because this is an easy one to understand. So every apparatus, except for floor, will have a dismount element group, which we all know it's the last element of the routine. On high bar also, you have flight elements. That's an element group. If you don't have a flight element, then you're going to be missing that element group, and you'll be starting with a lower start value. There's also long hang swings, like your giants and quasts or balcos. And then you've got in bar, which is when your body comes close to the bar. Things like Stalder, endos, and like Adlers. So every apparatus has 4 element groups. And in the past, you could just do any element, could be the simplest thing on earth, as long as it's got an A rating, you still get all 5 of those 10s. Well, now that's not the case. You get 1 element group that's kind of an easy gimme for various reasons. And then the rest of them, you got to do a big boy element in order to get those 5/10. And if you're just doing a little, A value element, you're only going to get 3/10 for the element group. So in order to get all 5/10 of the element group, you've got to do big boy skills.
Okay, so This is so interesting to me because I think a huge push from the gymnastics community has been to make gymnastics more understandable to the public and even to the nerdy gym fans. And now, not only does this seem like it's going to make it more complicated to understand, but also I'm thinking from a judging perspective that probably this first year of the Olympic cycle, we're going to see a lot more delays than we usually see. And I'm curious from your perspective, one, how would you go about training for this to make sure that you could be efficient and quick getting these element groups, whether it's going to be the 0.3 or the 0.5? And then how, if you are the FIG, do you work so that there are as few delays as possible?
Judges develop shortcuts, and it's just a matter of figuring out what are the shortcuts that are going to work for this code. I've already started practice judging a lot of routines for my website. So I've developed my own shortcuts that are starting to work for me. It's not going to be as fast as what it was before just because we've got more to process, but it is coming rather quickly now. So I think we'll be able to get into a good rhythm. On the FIG end, it depends on what their input screens are going to be like. You're going to have, I think it's going to be a few more things you'll have to input. So it's going to be a little bit slower, especially this first year as everyone's adapting to it. This first year, there's going to be mistakes. It's going to happen, especially at the junior level and such. So we just need to expect that and have a little bit of patience and realize that everyone's on a learning curve. And there's going to be mistakes with the coaches too, as far as on routine compositions and things that they weren't aware of, because they didn't read the code in detail, or there's some changes that are just so subtle that it's so easy to miss them, and I'll bring up a few of those during our talk today too, to help alert coaches to watch out for this little pitfall that you might not have known was there.
I'm wondering, when we talk about routine construction, and with the 10 element routines, you would often see even high level gymnasts maybe add in an A scale to give them a break, or maybe they weren't really as comfortable in that element group. And I'm wondering, do you think by going down to 8 elements, we may lose some of what I would call those filler elements in routines? Or do you think that we will continue to see those throughout?
Yeah, that's going to be probably one of the biggest things to make routines look different, is that as I'm going through some of the old routines and applying the new rules to them, one of the things I'm seeing is those filler elements are going away. And those are things that made the routines look similar. So on floor, you're not going to see from the elites, you're not going to see that double twist along the side. They don't need it anymore, on P-bars, everyone has Stutz and Diamondov, which, they're C's, they're decent, level skills, but, for guys that have decent highs, you don't need it anymore. So we'll see a lot of that go away. I think you're still going to see Magyar and Shavato on pommel horse. But for some other, apparatus, you're not going to see as many Stalders and endos on high bar. You just, those will go away.
So we've talked about some things that we think will go away. What are some things that you think that this code of points will help bring in more variety to help make a routine stand out or be more exciting to the viewer?
This code is geared towards big skills. There's so many difficult elements that were upgraded in their value. So you'll see guys throwing big skills. The other thing which makes this code actually maybe even dangerous is the extra value that comes from doing difficult dismounts. Because for the dismount element group, it's not 3/10 or 5/10. The dismount element group, your value is the value of the dismount itself. So if you are doing a, C value dismount, a C element is worth 3/10, and then you get 3/10 for your element group. If you're doing a D value, which is 4/10, you get 4/10 for your element group. If you're doing a G dismount, you've got 7/10 for your element group and 7/10 for that G. So when you're doing those big dismounts, it can pay off huge if you can land it.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of incentive there for the difficulty.
That's really interesting. That was a point I was not quite aware of yet. And it reminds me a lot of what happened with the figure skating code, which is if you did more difficult elements in the second half of your routine, you would get more points for that. And I think the other thing that's going to be interesting, particularly with floor, is we saw the majority of athletes end routines with a triple twist. But triple twists are no longer allowed. Am I correct in that? For your dismount, it has to be a double flipping skill.
Yeah, the dismount. All right, so dismounts on floor are different. So dismounts on floor, this rule is going to be clarified in the next week by the FIG.
Okay.
But going on what I know at this moment, dismounts on floor, they count as kind of there's a requirement that it must be a multiple flipping skill. All right, so the dismount, and this will stay, must be a multiple flipping skill. Otherwise, you get a penalty of 3/10. So you shouldn't see seniors dismounting with the triple full anymore. They should be doing a multiple flipping skill. It could be a triple back at the end, but you're not going to get that same, it doesn't count the same way as the other element groups are. You'll either get your 3/10 or 5/10. So if you dismounted with, say, a straight double back or a double back tuck, which is a C value, you're going to get 3/10 because it's 3/10 for the element group. If you do a D, let me do a D one. So if you do a D, you'll get the full 5/10 for the element group. All right. As opposed to the 4/10 you would have like in a oh gosh, that was a horrible way to explain that. We need to
No, that's okay. Good. So just to clarify, for all events except for vault and floor, the dismount letter is going to also give you would bonus be a good word, or additional D to your routine. So if you have a C, you're getting the 0.3 for the C plus the 0.3 for the dismount, except for floor and vault, because vault's just the one skill and then floor is its own.
Floor has way different rules. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So for dismounts, yeah, you're getting the value of the dismount plus the value of the dismount is also the value of the element group for the dismount. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So then let's take an apparatus that does actually use that dismount component, pommel horse. So we typically see D, maybe an E dismount on pommel horse. So we're going to see probably that range of those additional is 0.4 or 0.5. But what are some other differentiation that you think is going to happen on pommel horse?
On pommel horse, to make the routines look different from each other, that's one of the apparatus where I don't think it's going to look very different from what we're seeing now and what we're seeing, in what the gymnasts will do. I think there's still going to be a lot of similarity across routines there because there just aren't that many elements on pommel horse. I mean, it's the fewest elements of any apparatus. So you don't have that many to choose from. And then also there's so many restrictions as far as you can only have two, different cross-travel elements. You can only have two different, woo, you can only have one, like woo or Ross. You can't have them both in your routine now. You can only have one Tong Fei element. So there's so many restrictions on that sort of thing that there's going to be, I think, a lot of cookie cutter pommel horse routines.
So these new rules that get applied, I feel like in the community, there's often like lovingly named, they're lovingly named after a gymnast. And I think one of the most famous ones is like the Kohei rule. So after 2012 at the Olympic Games, when they had to decide in team finals, did he actually get to handstand? Did he get the dismount or did he not? And you weren't allowed to redo your dismount at that point. So like you either got it or you were really out of luck. And now you're allowed to complete your dismount, and that's considered the Kohei rule. And there's rules on floor where Kenzo Shirai, right, would only do twisting elements. So then they made a rule where you had to do double flipping elements in a routine. And that's lovingly referred to as the Kenzo Shirai rule. So throughout reading these changes that are happening to the code of points, do you think any of them should be dubbed or given a name or attribution?
Well, since you're on pommel horse right there, choose your, pommel horse flair guy, whether it's Lichi Kai or Abedini, who did a routine that was entirely out of flares, and now they have a cap of a maximum only four flares allowed in a routine. Yeah, you can look at a few of these different rules and say, even on T-bars, you've got your Dowser rule, shall we say, as far as the front uprise to handstand element. It's like, okay, we know you can do these, but he was just racking in the points on those, and it's like maximum of 2.
Oh, that's great. Are there any on rings any rule changes that you think may be owed to a gymnast?
Oh, on rings. On those, I think it's mostly execution things where you had certain gymnasts that had problematic executions, and a lot of those were actually cleared up last cycle. So I see on rings more things being encouraged than discouraged. So the inverts went up in value, and what else was it on rings that changed a lot? So yeah, I see, and like the crosses.
The cross upgraded.
Went up, upgraded too, but it's only like the cross itself. It's not like back upright to cross. That's still the same value. So that gets a little bit wonky in there. Yeah.
Now, looking at vault, right, this last code of points, the code of points leading into the Paris Olympic Games, there was a massive shift. So previously, in the code of points leading up to the Tokyo Olympics and everything prior, the way that you entered the vault was the way the vault family was delineated. And then there was a massive overhaul, which I think really benefited Artem, who was the 2022 world champion, where he used 2 front handspring vaults. Now, the vault families are changing again. So can you explain how many vault families are we going to have leading into LA? And then how did they regroup them?
So it's 5 vault families, and actually most of the vault families are the same. The thing that changed most was the Yurchenko vault family. That got switched around. It used to be you had the vault family so you had 2 Yurchenko vault families before, and it was differentiated by how you entered, where if you entered with a Yurchenko with a half onto the table or a full onto the table, that was one group, and if you had just a straight back handspring onto the table, that was the other group. Now they've aligned the Yurchenkos more similarly to the other vaults, where you have a twisting Yurchenko vault, and this is off the table. So if you're twisting off a full twist or more, then that's going to be in one group, and then the other one is the flipping Yurchenko group. So it's aligning with how the handspring entries and just your stoop type entries are. And the full twist onto the table, the Sherbo style vault, those are gone. Sorry, Sherbo.
They're all gone. What's the reason for removing those?
No one was doing them. When was the last time you saw someone doing a full twist onto a table out of Yurchenko?
Probably never, but I don't know. I feel like,
yeah,
I don't know. Having things in the code of points are, as options, I think are nice. And as you mentioned, for pommel horse specifically, there aren't a lot of elements, and so leaving elements that could be named after other people, or maybe upping the value of those vaults to incentivize people to do it, because that's how they incentivize people to get other skills that aren't being performed more often. So
yeah, but I mean, for and this is a good example, is that really the direction we want vault to go? Is that the direction that the FIG wants vault to go? Is that the direction that, do gymnasts like doing it? No, you don't get a whole lot of power when you got to be twisting onto the table. So it was kind of like this dead end sort of thing. And I can understand them saying, all right, this is just, it's kind of like the crossing of rings back in the
Sure.
day, it was a neat little thing for the time of period that it was there. But okay, let's move on from that.
That is fair. So I think, we've covered a lot of the differences in that are going to happen in the 6 events, but there's one thing that I am completely baffled by and would love your opinion on, and that is the implementation of the stick bonus. So in my mind, like, you're rewarded by sticking your dismount by not getting a deduction. And so I'm curious, like, how do you see like the benefits and negatives of implementing this sort of NCAA model of stick bonus? And is there going to be the green flag that's raised like there is in NCAA?
I have not heard about a green flag or something to alert the audience to it at this point. Maybe they've got something in the works, but I haven't heard about it if that's what they plan on doing it. But I have heard that the intention behind it was for the audience, and that it makes for an exciting competition to see that landing stuck. It's a thing that people kind of understand, and it's just an exclamation mark on a routine. It also is, again, a little bit more with that risk and reward, especially with the dismounts having that double elevated value for the dismount element group. Well, sometimes it might be the better idea to do a slightly easier dismount that you're going to stick. So there's an incentive to do a dismount well too.
Do you think it's potentially the FIG's way to also encourage staying healthy, for perhaps lack of a better term, because you mentioned that this code of points is going to incentivize more daring skills and potentially be more dangerous. So is the stick bonus maybe like the counterbalance to doing the more risky skills as a dismount?
Might be. Hopefully it might have some of that effect, because that's something that I know, some coaches and some other people, are concerned about, that people will be just, chucking skills. And I hope that's not the case. The fact that they have reduced the number of elements to 8 elements, it gives a little bit more time to be able to work more difficult skills and to be able to master them better. And hopefully people will just, do the things that they have mastered. In the very beginning of the code of points, it says, that they have to do skills that they can fully do. They shouldn't be checking stuff.
So with the lowering of the skills from 10 to 8, are they also changing the time requirements for any of the 6 apparatuses?
Yeah, the only apparatus that actually has a time requirement is floor, and floor will go back down to 70 seconds, which it was in the past. The counter to that is also they're requiring the scale. And the scale is going to take up 2 of those seconds. So shall we talk about the scale?
I think it's time. So again, the FIG is now requiring, one can only assume, in an attempt to quote unquote increase artistry in men's gymnastics, to add a scale. And I just remember being at national team camp and talking to some of the athletes about it, and them being like, man, when I was a level 4, I fell over on a scale, and like, I'm still going to be falling over on a scale. And I think it's going to make for some extremely comical GIFs. So like, let's start with those positives. Extremely comical GIFs. They're going to become memes forever, for sure. And moments of comedy for the audience. But aside from that, I am baffled by this change.
It was a compromise, or this is my impression, is that it was basically a compromise, that they wanted to add in something with artistry. And in the earliest drafts of this code, when they were floating around ideas, they had said a choreographic sequence, or,
right.
So, but what is that? How are they going to define it? And, how are judges going to evaluate it? How would Fujitsu evaluate it? So that's the other kind of part of it. And I think that the compromise that they came up with was, well, let's add a scale. I
For those of you who didn't get to see this video on Neutral Deductions YouTube channel, I highly recommend going to find it. It's on YouTube, it's on Instagram. So I was at the pre-Olympic national team camp, and USA Gymnastics very graciously allowed me to make this video, and the guys were incredibly great sports about it. And I got to ask all of the national team members to show me their best scales, and man, to see these in a floor routine, what I really almost think is the best thing is, do you start with a scale? Do you add it in the middle with your non-acro element? I'm curious to see how this is actually going to evolve in the routines.
I am pretty sure it's going to end up before the last pass.
As a breather.
Yep, that's because you can't stand in the corner for more than 2 seconds unless you're on one leg.
Oh my gosh, I think you're right. Exactly. Oh my goodness, that is exact. It's going to become like the women's flamingo pose when the women's code of points made that change. Like, you can't stand in the corner with the 2 feet and get the breath in. So they all did that like silly flamingo pose, and now it's going to be the scale for the men. Oh my heavens.
But more entertaining for sure, because it will have to be, a legit, scale. Well, it does say one leg balance, but yeah.
Well, the one I'm just really hoping that some will do, and actually I have to give a shout out to Michigan's Landon Blix, because he did this in that video I was just referencing it's the scale on one leg where you tilt your head backwards and your feet forward. It's like you're in an upside down T, and his actually looked pretty good. But I think that let me ask you this. You can get deductions for scales, right? Like, you could fall, you could not be in a correct position. Like, this is just a deduction mania, like, waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so then another question for you. So we have people like gymnasts in the US, like Riley Luce, who are doing really innovative non-acro skills, but they won't add them into the code of points. So do you think, are we going to start seeing unique scales show up at World Cups and World Challenge Cups trying to get named after gymnasts? And is the FIG actually going to allow them?
Well, I would hope so, because there's only 2 boxes of scales that are in the code of points currently, which doesn't lend for a lot of variety. So that's one. I mean, there's a few different varieties within those 2 boxes, but there's really only 2 boxes that have scales in them, or one leg balance, because that's what it's technically called, a one leg balance. So I would hope that someone can get kind of creative in there, but as far as naming things go, there is a rule that they don't name skills that are less than a C value. So that's still in there. So most of your one leg balances would probably be falling below the value of a C. I don't know, maybe someone like Heath could do like a turn into a one leg balance. Yeah.
Maybe. Heath, I am doing a podcast with Heath, I think, next week on the Bundesliga. So if he's listening, or if he's not listening, I'll make sure and give him that suggestion.
Yeah, always hear from me.
I most certainly will. So we've talked about some of the big overarching changes that are happening at a high level for this code of points. What are some of the small changes, but they're still notable, that people should be aware of?
Okay. So obviously, there's a lot of max 1 and maximum 2 restrictions on the apparatus. So one of the little subtle things on pommel horse is a single pommel loop has to end with both your hands on the pommel, and you can't finish the single pommel loop putting your hand over on the leather. And it doesn't say this in the code of points. And the way it was notated was in the box with the pictures. They eliminated one of the pictures where he ends with his hands on one hand of leather, one hand on the pommel. So it's one of those things that's like so subtle in the code of points that you'll miss it, unless you know that it's there, or someone's told you it's there. It's like, oh, yeah. And I mean, they did the same thing in a previous cycle where, and again, it was on pommel horse, where they added a picture of you could finish a loop, with one hand on pommel, one hand on leather, going, from leather to pommel sort of thing. And that would still count as a loop. So, I mean, they've done this before where they just change a pictogram, but they don't tell anyone that they changed the pictogram, and they just hope you notice on your own. I mean, they'll tell people the courses and the course materials, I'm sure, and bringing that out in there. But, coaches don't go to judges' courses normally. So any coaches that are listening, make sure you're finishing your single pommels loop on one pommel with both hands on one pommel. So that's, one thing that's easily missed. Another thing is on rings. It's real easy to be losing the skills that would break up your force strength elements, because back uprise to straddle L is no longer a B element. So that's now recognized as just back uprise to support and L hold. So that's going to be a big problem for the juniors who would use that to break up their strength. And also something, that people can easily miss. Yeah. And it's just so subtle too. So there's those things that are little, but yeah, there's like other not so little things that I think will have a bigger effect on the routine compositions for each apparatus.
So on floor, there was sort of this workaround in the last Olympic cycle where what we believe was intended was the way to get bonus was to do the twisting into a double flipping skill. But the way it ended up being written, it didn't quite it didn't have the intended effect. And so we saw a lot of things like a back 2.5 to a punch front layout to get bonus. So have they clarified that, or have they changed how you get bonus on floor and on high bar?
All right. Yeah, there's some changes to the connection bonus rules. As far as, let me talk about the floor stuff first. So with floor, with that change that happened last time, last cycle, it was for double reasons. So it wasn't just to add in a double flipping skill, and to encourage connection out of double flipping or into double flipping skills, whichever way it goes. But it was also because the evaluation of twist to twist elements was really difficult. They were poorly done. It was bad for the gymnast's health, because you would end up having gymnasts be cheating each one by a quarter twist. So you had a lot more of that side sort of landing and taking off that was happening. So a bigger part of the reason for that rule, it wasn't just to bring in encourage the double flipping connections. It was also looking out for gymnasts' health. So although that might have not been their original intention to be able to connect, with a, B front layout, whatever, it would still serve the other grander purpose of athlete health and, better evaluations of those elements too, which is why they kept it, So if they really didn't want it, then they could have said no to it. But it's like, no, it still serves this purpose. Now, in the code coming up on floor, because you have 8 elements, if you're a gymnast of the caliber that's going to be getting connection, you may not want to have a B in your, which would be those simple single flipping, elements. You might not want to have one of those in there counting, because it still does need to be among your counting elements.
Sure.
So we'll see what happens. You'll see less connection in floor, and the ones that are connecting, it might be those 2/10 connections, D plus B or higher on floor.
And what about connection on high bar?
Oh, high bar, I love what they've done with high bar. First of all, we can now connect group 1 and 3 elements. So the long hang swings and the in bar swings can get connected to flight for bonus as long as the element 1 or 3 element is a D or higher. So you can get that connection in there for that way. But then also flight elements are exciting on high bar, so they want to encourage more flight elements in connection with them. Remember Name Off back in 2004, I think it was. Those connected. So you can add an extra flight element. Normally you're allowed only 4 flight elements, but you can have a 5th if 2 of your flights are connected. However, the caveat there is that you can only have 2 from the same family. So you can only have 2 Kovacs, you can only have 2 Tkachevs, and even if you connect 2 of those, if you're going to have a 5th flight element, it needs to be from a different family. So say maybe probably what you're going to see is Yamawakis, because those are easy. But you might see some Gaylords thrown in there, double front over the bar. And a lot of the flight elements that you haven't seen very much of over the past couple of cycles, so many of those have been upgraded. Jaegers and the Gaylords, and even Ginger got an upgrade. Come on, we're gonna see.
I cannot believe the Ginger is a D. I like what?
Yeah, we're gonna see a lot of Gingers tacked on to the end of flight series. Because you could get a connection on both sides of the flight. So, yep, that's the one we're gonna see.
But before we wrap up for today, I want to talk a little bit about changes that I think, or that you think, may benefit the athletes a little bit more. So we had just spoken about floor and having the connection of the twist to the double flipping elements, and how those elements got bonus in the previous code of points and will also get bonus in this code of points. But what we saw at the Olympics, which I think took a lot of people by surprise, are when those gymnasts landed the double flipping elements really low and not only lost connection for the bonus connection, but also value of the skill. And so people like Luke Whitehouse, who I think they did do the right thing in taking it, but for me, his was the best routine out of everyone. And I'm just so sad that he got hammered in such a way. And so this rule is going away. It's going back to how it was at the very beginning of the Olympic cycle leading into Paris. So can you help expand upon this and explain why did they make this change in the first place, and now why are they going back?
Okay, we're going to need to table this one for 1 week.
Okay.
Because here's the deal. In the general section of the Code of Points, it says that you can get connection bonus even with, for any case except for a fall, which means that you could get connection bonus even if there's a large error. However, in the floor section, it says that you cannot get connection with a large error. Now, the general thought is that they just forgot to delete that sentence from the floor section.
Oh, no.
But we don't know that for sure. The Men's Technical Committee is meeting right as we're speaking. They've been meeting for, I think they've got like the 6-day meeting in Lausanne to iron out some little discrepancies like this, and we will have the official statement on what this is. And this is something that they do, when they revise the Code of Points. It's not going to be perfect. You don't anticipate every scenario, and and sometimes you just don't proofread very well and you forget to delete things.
I don't know anything about that.
Right. So as they, have their long list of, things that, we weren't anticipating that. Like, they have a meeting and they'll have this list of frequently asked questions. And in past cycles, after, at this point in the development of the code, they'll put out an FAQ document, which is the equivalent of like a newsletter. So the copy of the Code of Points that they put out in July, which is the most recent one, that's not your final copy. They will not, I don't anticipate them issuing a new Code of Points right now. What they've
Sure.
done in the past is, at this point, they would issue a frequently asked questions document, which also gets into some of the interpretations and things of people just not realizing how rules are meant to be applied there. Clarify some of the things that might have been errors and typos and such, and also some of the other issues that have come up. So like another issue that's come up is also on floor, because they don't count the dismounts the same way as on other apparatus. So they need to clarify around some of that stuff too. So anyway, so they're meeting this week. So next week, we could do a follow-up and I could give you a much clearer answer on that.
Absolutely.
Official answer. Yeah.
Okay. Kathi-Sue, thank you so much for joining me. For those of you who don't know, Kathi-Sue runs a website called Flip Decisions, and I don't think it's overstating that it is like one of the most used resources by judges and coaches across the world. I certainly had your documents up when I was working at the Olympics this summer, making sure I had the rules very easily accessible. She has everything from a mag-made simple doc, so people who are wanting to get into men's artistic gymnastics, there's a document for you that helps you understand the very basics, all the way to the high-level gym nerd, the high-level judge who wants to learn, maybe what Kathi-Sue is going to be doing for the symboling and the shortcut for signing the 0.3 or the 0.5 element group, or asking for explanation on new rules in the code of points. So I highly recommend giving her website a look and following her there. And as she mentioned, she will be back next week, and we are going to go over things like, what did the men's technical committee clarify? So the things that we were a little bit unsure of here today, or that were just clarified, we'll bring you that information. We're going to talk about, how do you even become a men's gymnastics judge in the US, or a Brevet International judge? We're going to talk about what the process is for studying for that, because all of the judges have a big test coming up for the next Olympic cycle. We're going to go over judging bias research, because Kathi-Sue is one of the leading experts on gymnastics judging research. We're going to talk about the Jordan Chiles scandal and how that's going to affect judging in the future. And then anything that you wish, Kathi-Sue particularly wishes, that gym fans knew about judging. So do not miss this episode. It is going to be fantastic. So as always, thank you so much for leaving us 5-star reviews. If you would, please review us on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It really does help us out. You can donate to Neutral Deductions to help us bring live gymnastics coverage. So if you would like to do that, we are on PayPal and Stripe, and the PayPal link is in every show note and at the bottom of every article. If you have any questions, comments, or insider tips, you can email us at neutraldeductions@gmail.com. That's all for this week. We'll see you next time.